Hello, thank you for listening. My name is Klaus Richter, and I want to tell you a story from a time when I was just 30 years old, though I felt ancient even then. A lifetime ago, and yet it is clearer to me now than what I ate for breakfast this morning. Before the war, my world was simple. It smelled of wet pavement after a summer rain, of ink on official forms, of the cheap tobacco smoke that filled the precinct hallways in Berlin. I was a police officer, Kriminaloberwachtmeister Richter. I believed in the sanctity of the line. On one side of that line was civilization, order, the steady rhythm of a society that worked. On the other side was chaos, the thief, the murderer, the anarchist. My job, my entire purpose was to stand on that line, to be the wall. I saw the weakness, the decadence, the decay in the Republic, and I believed that a strong hand, a firm law, was the only thing that could save Germany from collapsing into itself. When the time came, putting on the field gray uniform felt logical. A promotion. My beat was no longer a few city blocks, but the entire border of the Reich. The enemy, the Bolshevik, was simply the ultimate criminal, the ultimate agent of chaos. The war, for me, was the final and most necessary act of law enforcement. People imagine the Eastern Front as a constant storm of fire and steel, and it was, but mostly it was a place where certainty died. The clean lines I had drawn my entire life dissolved into the mud. You start to question everything. You question your orders, you question your comrades. Most terrifying of all, you begin to question the man you see reflected in a shard of broken glass. Was that still Klaus Richter, the policeman from Berlin? Or was it something else, something shaped by the filth and the killing? For me, the answer to that question was waiting in a hole in the ground, in a forgotten village that had been erased from the map. It began, as all things did in that summer of 1942, with the roar of a Soviet counterattack. We called it the Rzhev Meat Grinder, a fitting name. It was a place that consumed men and machines without distinction. That morning the air was thick and wet, tasting of diesel fumes and rot. My unit, the 11th Panzer, was pushing through the skeletal remains of a village. The name is gone, lost to memory and fire. It was just another collection of splintered logs and collapsed brick chimneys on the road to Rzhevka. My world had shrunk to the interior of our Schützenpanzerwagen, the rhythmic clatter of the tracks, a monstrous heartbeat against the earth. I was a Panzergrenadier, a stormtrooper. My job was not to hold a line, but to be the tip of the spear that broke the enemy's line. It was an aggressive, forward-moving version of my old life. Find the disorder and crush it. The sky was the color of a fresh bruise. We dismounted, spreading out, the dry stalks of sunflowers crackling under our boots. I was an observer, my police training making me notice the small things. A child's doll lying face down in the dirt, its porcelain head cracked, the unnatural silence between artillery barrages. Every detail was a clue. On the streets of Berlin, it meant a break-in, a domestic dispute. Here it meant an ambush, it meant death. The world tore itself apart at exactly 10:17. I remember looking at my watch a moment before, an act of habit, of order, in a world that had none. First came the whistle, a sound that starts small and grows until it fills your entire skull. Then the ground erupted. Katyusha rockets, Stalin's organs, screamed overhead, a symphony of destruction. Our advance stalled, then shattered. The air became a solid wall of noise and flying earth. A shell struck our half-track. I didn't see it, I felt it. A fist of pure force slammed into me, throwing me through the air like the doll in the dirt. My ears rang with a piercing, metallic whine that drowned out everything. The world went silent, yet screamed. I came to with the taste of blood and brick dust in my mouth. My head throbbed, a relentless drumbeat of pain. I was alone. The mangled, burning wreck of the half-track was 100 meters away, a funeral pyre for my squad. Gunfire stitched the air, a frantic, close-quarters conversation between our MG-34s and their Degtyaryovs. My training took over, disoriented, separated, but not broken. I was a policeman again, on the trail of a dangerous suspect. Only this time I was both the hunter and the hunted. I crawled, keeping low, moving from one crater to the next. The ruins of the village became my new precinct. A shattered wall was my cover. A collapsed roof was my vantage point. I was looking for a sign, any sign of my unit. A glimpse of field gray, the bark of a German rifle, but there was only chaos. The line had not just been broken, it had been obliterated. Hours passed, or maybe it was minutes. Time, like the line, had ceased to exist. The sounds of the main battle faded, moving east. I was trapped, a ghost in a dead town. As dusk began to bleed across the sky, painting the smoke in shades of orange and purple, I found a building that was slightly less destroyed than the others. A former municipal office, perhaps. The stone facade was pockmarked and scorched, but the foundation seemed solid, a place to wait, a place to think. As I slipped through a gaping hole where a door used to be, a sound reached me. It was not the crack of a rifle or the groan of shrapnel-torn metal. It was a human sound, a low, steady moan of pain. My heart hammered against my ribs, a wounded Russian waiting to put a bayonet in my back, a trap. My senses, honed on the back alleys of Berlin, screamed at me. I unslung my Kar 98K, the worn wooden stock familiar and comforting in my hands. I moved slowly, silently, my boots making no sound on the rubble-strewn floor. The sound was coming from below, from the cellar. I found the stairs, a treacherous slope of broken concrete and twisted rebar. I took a deep breath, the air cold and damp, and began to descend into the darkness. The first thing that hit me was the smell. It was a smell I knew, but it was utterly alien here, not the stench of death and decay that hung over the battlefield like a shroud. This was the sharp, clean scent of carbolic acid, antiseptic. Underneath it, the coppery tang of fresh blood and the sour odor of human sweat and fear. At the bottom of the stairs, a single kerosene lamp cast long, dancing shadows. My eyes adjusted. And my world, the carefully constructed world of Klaus Richter, fell apart. It was a makeshift hospital. A dozen or so figures lay on pallets, on torn-open grain sacks, on the bare earth floor, and moving among them was a man. He was tall and gaunt, with a face carved from exhaustion. He wore the uniform of a Soviet medical officer, but it was stained and ragged. A crudely painted red cross was on a strip of cloth tied around his arm. He was the enemy. My mind, my training, my very being screamed it, enemy. I raised my rifle, the iron sights centering on his chest. He must have sensed me. He turned slowly. He didn't flinch. He didn't raise his hands. His eyes, deep-set and weary, met mine. There was no hatred in them, no fear, only a profound, bottomless fatigue. He looked at my rifle, then looked back at me, and then he did something that paralyzed me. He turned his back to me, knelt beside one of the wounded, and continued to wrap a bandage around a bloody leg. My finger was on the trigger. It would be so easy. One less Bolshevik, an act of war, an act of duty. But my eyes, my policeman's eyes, started to see the details. The man the doctor was tending to, he was wearing the field gray uniform of the Wehrmacht, a German soldier. My gaze swept across the room. On another pallet, a Russian with a grievous head wound lay next to a German boy, no older than 18, his face pale and waxy. And huddled in the far corner, silent and wide-eyed with terror, were two small children, Russian children. A boy and a girl clinging to each other. They were not soldiers, they were not combatants, they were just children. This wasn't a military position, it wasn't an ambush point, it was a sanctuary. A desperate, insane attempt to impose a different kind of order on the absolute chaos above. The doctor finished his work and rose. He walked over to a small table where a bucket of water stood, a precious, life-giving resource. He dipped a tin cup into it and walked towards me. He stopped a few feet away, held out the cup, and said something in Russian. I didn't understand the words, but the meaning was as clear as a Berlin morning. Thirsty. He was offering me, his mortal enemy who stood ready to kill him, a drink of water. My rifle suddenly weighed 1,000 kilos. My whole belief system, the rigid framework of my life, the law, the line, the clear distinction between friend and foe, order and chaos, it was all grinding to a halt like stripped gears in a machine. Here in this cellar, the rules were different. The uniform did not matter. The flag did not matter. The only thing that mattered was the wound. The only law was the desperate struggle for life. The doctor, this one man, was standing on a line far more profound than any I had ever guarded. The line between life and death, and he was holding it for everyone. I couldn't pull the trigger. To do so would have been a violation. Not of the Geneva Convention. That was a lawyer's fantasy out here. It would have been a violation of something older, something fundamental. I slowly, deliberately lowered my rifle. The doctor nodded, a small, almost imperceptible gesture of understanding. He placed the cup of water on a crate near me and went back to his work. I spent the rest of the night in that cellar, a silent guard. I watched him move from German to Russian, from soldier to child, his hands never faltering, his quiet determination a force more powerful than any artillery barrage. In the heart of the meat grinder, I had found the one thing I thought was extinct on the Eastern Front, a man. I never saw him again. Before dawn, I slipped out and found my way back to the German lines. I never spoke of what I saw. Who would have believed me? How could I explain that I had found the enemy, and he had shown me what true duty looked like? I spent the rest of my life fixing things in a way. After the war, I returned to the police force. I spent decades enforcing statutes and city ordinances, redrawing those simple, clear lines of society. But I never again believed that they were absolute. My professional worldview was broken that night, and it could never be fully repaired. I had built a career, a life, on the idea that the law of the state was the ultimate authority. In that cellar, I learned that the law has borders. It ends at the entrance to a shelled-out building. But a man's humanity, his duty to another bleeding soul, that follows you even into hell. The hardest lesson is this: order is not something that is imposed by a government or an army. That is just control. True order, the kind that matters, is what a man chooses to create when all control has been lost. It's a doctor who treats an enemy. It's a hand that offers water when it would be easier to pull a trigger. You do not find civilization in the grand proclamations of leaders, but in the small, defiant acts of compassion in the face of utter madness. This memory is a piece of shrapnel I carry. It's heavy. Help me carry it. Subscribe and ensure these stories are never left to rust in silence.